Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a really interesting guest in Mike Aoki, and we're going to be talking about how do you rebalance your contact centers? How do we find that perfect balance for success so that we're high performance, we're doing everything that we need to do? And Mike's an expert in this. Mike, you not only have a consulting company that you work with customer support teams and sales teams on a regular basis. You started out as an agent and then moved into training and now consulting. So you like to talk about it as I'm a native, not a visitor to this island. And you've got a really interesting concept called the Morse code effect that I'm going to start out with. But before I do that, I'd love to just turn it over to you and maybe have you explain a little bit more about your background so we can get to know you.
Sure. Well, that sounds good. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. I'm really focused in terms of helping people just develop their customer service skills or sales skills or coaching skills. It's all about communication. Because ultimately, that's what customer service is. When you ask that question, why do you even have a customer service team or a contact center? It's to help your customers and communicate with them and be able to go and help engage them. So that's really what I want to focus on, is doing that during this conversation.
Well, good. Well, let's start out with this kind of unique mindset and approach you have, the Morse code effect. Explain what the Morse code effect is and why we need to know about it and what we need to do.
It's actually funny, but it came up as a joke, actually, in the sense that think about people that are actually typically like Gen Z or in the millennial age range. So under 30, under 25, digital natives, they have a phone, but they don't make phone calls on it. They chat, they text, access social media sites, but they're not actually using that as a telephone. So the challenges and what really came out in training groups like Work for Customer Service was the fact that it's almost like asking people our age to go and use Morse code on a telegraph. It's an ancient technology. Asking our youngest employees, which typically customer service is, our youngest employees use a technology, voice over the phone, that they typically don't do. And worse yet, we're asking them to go and do that now with people that are calling in. And the groups that are most likely to call in are going to be boomers and Gen Xer, and people 50 plus, 65 plus that grew up talking on the phone, a wired phone attached to a wall. So the unfairness is we're asking youngest employees that don't typically talk on a phone to talk on a phone with people that always talk on a phone and are angry or upset. That's also not fair as well. So part of this is, in the last probably 5 years, has been training Gen Zs, young millennials, how to use the phone and how to use voice to be able to go and communicate effectively with older customers and customers that typically want to talk on the phone.
It makes perfect sense. We can assume it's the phone. We don't have to train anybody to be on the phone, but if it's not in their comfort zone, just like doing Morse code would not be my comfort zone.
Exactly.
I know it's clicks and I could see and I could probably work my way through it, but it wouldn't be my comfort zone. And not only do they have to be in their comfort zone, but they have to be on top of their game, to your point. These are people that are upset, they have problems, they need to be solved, they're calling in. So is that part of like the changing paradigm in contact centers? That we need to understand some of all these things that are affecting factors. If you were to say that's part of it, that's a big part of this paradigm shift. Take us through kind of what you see as the changing paradigm inside of contact centers.
Sure. One of them is a demographic piece, as I mentioned, in terms of younger employees. And I think sometimes when I talk to directors and contact centers, they assume the skills are there because for our age group, it is talking on the phone and they don't necessarily empathize with what's going on with the younger employees. And the fact that, say, for instance, onboarding the higher training that should be spending more time now being able to go and help younger employees be able to practice their phone skills and voice communication and learning about how to be more fluent on the phone and not just speaking, but also listening. Do they paraphrase? Can they pick up on emotional cues in the customer's vocal tone? Those are challenges there. And I think what we always run into as well as the idea, and if you ask this question to your employees, how many of you want to be on the voice queue? How many of you want to be on the chat queue? Because it's what we're used to. Here's a challenge though, when it comes to contact centers. We don't get to choose our customers for the most part. So unless we're a brand that appeals only to young people that want to do chat, for instance, okay, we're going to have some customers that'll want to talk on the phone. If we're broad-based, like a bank, an insurance company, a general consumer product, we're going to have all age ranges, including people that do want to talk on the phone as their first option. That means that we have to have some employees in the contact center that can help folks over the phone. So there's a basic paradigm shift there where we have to be able to deal with those issues. And it's funny because there's all this talk about being able to help shift things more towards, for instance, the impact of AI. And looking towards that, I think one of the other challenges, the second paradigm shift that I'm seeing is the fact that AI is very good at dealing with straightforward issues right now. As a virtual voice agent, it's not as good yet at dealing with more complex issues, more emotional issues. And so the challenge there right now is that as AI is taking over the more transactional inquiry type questions, it's leaving more of the complex and emotional issues for your tier one agents to handle. And so the second paradigm shift is the fact that you're asking tier one agents now to handle tier two caliber issues, not been trained on how to do that. What happens is it drives more escalations. That's a second trend I've heard a lot of is escalations have increased tremendously. And now we have managers, directors who are spending their time answering escalations for things that never should have been escalated. And that's a challenge as well.
So that's an opportunity for shifting, following this paradigm, and really the way that we think about deploying our agents and the training that we have to do for our agents. And you actually have a kind of an opinion on how do we start balancing this people and then balancing the technology and the AI in the paradigm shifts that you're just talking about, those challenges. What does that mean in terms of the balance there? Everybody's worried that the people are going away, the agents are going away. So what's your thoughts on all this?
Well, it's funny that with every new technology that comes out, there's always an overly optimistic viewpoint of what the technology can do. And that's fine. It's brand new. Everyone loves brand new things. It's very enthusiastic. In this wave, it was that AI would take care of customer service. And there was a lot of hype around how good it is. And it's actually quite impressive. It is actually quite good. A lot of applications, but it won't necessarily place all the human interaction. You're still going to have some customers that want to speak to somebody live that won't trust an AI or become upset if it's an AI. You'll also have issues. It'll be complex, but its very nature, customer service is the exception department. It was easy for it. It would have been in the marketing materials. It would be in the self-help website. Customer service is the exception department. The challenge there is you can't always, as a programmer, anticipate every exceptional scenario. There's always going to be some where the AI is going to be not in the database. It has to go to a live agent to be able to help resolve. And so there's a challenge there in the sense that there's going to be that rebalancing. And we're already seeing that in the second half of the year. Okay. The first half of the year was all about implementing AI. And some people predicting that would take over the contact center. You wouldn't even need a contact center. It'll just be AI. Now, the challenges that are there, the exceptional nature of customer service being the exception department, it's coming enough that when people are saying, no, we'll have to keep people, which is a good thing, and how they interact with customer support and meet our customers where they are. I saw one status, a survey taken by ICMI, the Incoming Calls Management Institute, and they surveyed VPs and directors and found out that 87% of contact centers are planning to hire more people, or at least replace for attrition next year in 2025. So right off the bat there, the idea is, no, we need a balance between technology and human capability.
You really outlined it well too, is that might be different a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, but the empathy, and there's also a feeling of I'm important enough to talk to a real person and that they didn't get pigeonholed into a bot to be handled. We all know that we're being handled automatically by technology. So there's a level of just, you're important. We want to serve you. We want to make sure you're taken care of. So we're going to enable this to happen. Is that a part of the thinking of maintaining people, not only the escalations, the hard questions, the empathy, but just, I would never get away with no live agents, because what is that sending as a message to my customers? Is that a thing?
Definitely, I'll give you an example. This is actually going back long before automation and AI, but I did work in one contact center, which had a section for outbound. And in the outbound one, because customers would have to call back and ask for somebody, they used a code name. And it was a generic name that every rep will use for their outbound calls. So when the customer called back, they would actually just ask for that person. That would be the trigger, or transfer them to the outbound team for this issue. The challenge became, though, and in one instance it became, that just the fact that it was a code name, not a real person, actually caused a lot of upset and anger. So the whole thing here is the idea about AI can do an awful lot. And as a customer, if it's a straight up question, I don't mind an AI. I just want an answer. I couldn't find it myself on the website. I don't care if it's an AI. I just want to find out the answer. That's okay. But there are some issues that'll be more emotional and more complex, more demographics, where they really want a live person with a real name, where they're going to want to speak with a live person. So again, when you think about customer service, meeting your customers where they are, they're going to be legacy customers. exceptional issues that will need live human interaction in that sense. So even if efficiently you can do it all with AI, you're still going to have some customers that will want to speak to a human just because. So it'll be an issue that's there.
We all talk a lot about training for the agents, but what you're talking about, a lot of this is training and equipping the leaders to understand these paradigms, make these shifts, make and adapt. So really there's a level of training for the leaders. How are you equipping leaders for these kinds of conversations, these kinds of paradigms? How do you convince them that they need to think differently? They need to be trained differently, not just the agents themselves.
I think part of it too is the idea about, again, looking at data and looking at the number of escalations of what is causing them, looking at the demographics of the customer base and who's contacting you, and then what channel are they using? How many voice, how many chat, how many email, to go and see what the demand is, and then just look at how do you match that? Also, let's be honest, there's a question about cost as well, depending on what you sell, what you service, what your branding is, how much you want to invest in each side of the home, technology, and people to offer the best service possible. There are some extreme examples. An example is Frontier Airlines, and they actually got rid of their voice queue. They made a decision as an economy airline that they'd offer a no frills package to not have people answering the phone anymore. And I don't know, maybe that fit with how they want to brand and the cost savings and their cost conscious model. But again, looking in terms of what is your branding? Are you offering great customer service? Do you pride yourself on elite service? Okay, then you want to maintain a voice presence, meet your customers where they're at. So again, all those factors come together. And there's no one right or wrong answer. It again depends on your customer base, who you want to reach, how you want to represent yourself, what the brand is.
You've talked about, just as an industry, that there needs to be rebalancing for the contact center, not just the rebalancing of the people versus the technology, but our industry in total. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think part of it too is just the idea of what the customer service department or contact center is. Is it a cost center? Is it a value center? Is it a revenue center? Looking in terms of what it does. And I think one of the drawbacks is there is this perspective of the contact center as a cost center. Almost begrudgingly, we have to do it as opposed to looking at that as a value center. It's one of your greatest sources of intelligence out there. Customers are fair enough to call in and alert you to certain issues or drawbacks or opportunities. Great feedback there. Voice of the customer, voice of your frontline employees. Okay, tremendous knowledge that's there that you won't get from a focus group or from a generic survey. Okay, so great value there. Great value in terms of building loyalty with your customer base. Again, you don't know how good a provider is until you have a problem. Everyone sounds good in the advertisements. You don't know for sure you have a problem, how good they are, and therefore how loyal you want to be to them. So those are all advantages and opportunities that are there. And again, it's just that mindset shift. But it is challenging though, because it is viewed, I know, as being constant in many cases.
I'm not going to ask in terms of like stats or survey or anything, but you work with a lot of different contact centers. And this isn't a new problem, being perceived as a cost center versus a value center. And you're having thousands of conversations with the voice of highest authority in your business, the customer. There's tremendous value to be translated from that. When you're talking on a consulting basis with these contact centers, and they're aware of that every single day, they're all aware of that, this perception of cost center versus value center. What is the degree that they think they really need to do something about that? That they need to be proactive in changing the perceptions inside their own company, even if it's just to garner more resources to be able to provide more value, to advocate for themselves. Like, how far up this in the list of priorities, or is it still something that's kind of like, it's not the best, but let's just keep going forward?
I think it's actually one of the biggest frustrations that leaders have is trying to make the case for their contact center, for their customer service team, and being able to communicate the value and the need for resources there as well. Because another challenge as well with the adoption of AI is a lot of the budget went towards AI. And there are efficiencies that are there, and there are customer service improvements that are there, but it's been quite a challenge. So part of it is, as a VP, as a director, how do you advocate for your department? How do you speak language that your CFO or your CIO or CTO has to be able to get those resources and advocate for your team? And that's a big challenge. So it's being able to go and speak that kind of language and be able to translate what you're seeing in the contact center and what's being funneled up, and being able to translate that to what the C-suite needs to hear, which is building loyalty, being able to help engage customers, gathering intelligence, being able to help improve the brand positioning, those sorts of things that result in revenue.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit if I haven't already. But if they know they need to be advocating for themselves, they know they need to be addressing this, where do you start? Do you start by saying, hey, at the board level, cost is not the main KPI. So therefore, average handle time is not the key KPI. Like the bastions of how, like at the most basic level, if we're a cost center, then we reduce costs. So the whole mentality is, how do we reduce? Is that the place to start? Or like just head on, we're not a cost center. So therefore, every KPI that you're looking at is actually misleading. How do we do this? How do we start this advocacy conversation?
Part of it is just as with any other kind of sale, because you're selling ideas, any other kind of sale is know your target market. So what is your corporate culture? Do they view the contact center as a cost center? The C-suite themselves, looking at your CEO, your COO, your CFO, CTO, what is their background? How do they view things? Do they come from a background where it's all about value and building customer experience, or is it a cost-cutting mindset? If it is, know your audience, know where they're at. Be careful, because the default seems to be it's a cost center, and therefore cost efficiency metrics like AHT tend to take precedent, or it's all they'll ask about is AHT or overall payroll cost. And you do want to show efficiencies, and there can be efficiencies there, but part of it is also showing value as well. What is a pain point for the executive? Is it reputational damage from a customer who wasn't held properly, escalating on social media? Okay, that's an opportunity there to argue for better customer service and more resources to avoid that happening, to avoid reputational damage, for instance. Another issue might be in the sense of building loyalty. Again, depending upon what your brand is, being able to help build loyalty by giving great customer service, by answering the phone really quickly or answering chats really quickly, therefore having the resources to do that, whether it's technical or people. So again, looking here, what's the value for the brand and for the company? And then how do you back that up through what the contact center does, and then shift that conversation from being cost only to being cost, and then what you get from that cost, what the benefit is. So just like with any other sale, selling the idea about what's the benefit we're selling here? Is it just cost savings, or is it improving loyalty, improving branding, avoiding reputational risk, avoiding public damage? Okay, changing the tone of the conversation is really important to do.
What I'd love to add to that is we remember things 22 times more when it's told to us in the form of a story. So lots of times when we have folks onto the podcast here, we'll ask them about certain points they're talking about in stories. We want, one of the goals of this podcast is to be other leaders talking about things, how it impacted their contact center, their business, how they demonstrated that they were a value center, not a cost center, and give more ammunition to advocate. So I'm just going to ask you, what's a story that of all the contact centers that you've worked with, this is like a shining example of how you're not a cost center, you're a tremendous value center? How did it impact product development? How did it impact sales? How did it impact operations? How did it impact anything that proved in your mind? Like a shining example of why we're not a cost center. We're a value center.
Well, one of the examples is in terms of just appropriate upselling. So being able to go and again, engage with customers, help them with an issue, building goodwill, building good loyalty, and then being able to go and point out any ways that the customer can either save money or make better use of a product. Now, I know upselling, we talked about it an awful lot. And one thing I will caution with upselling is don't set an arbitrary target, because your agents try to meet the target by putting customers into things. There's been examples of that where some companies have had very high, lofty revenue targets, and agents have used falsified built accounts, for instance, things like that. So be careful of that. But opportunity upselling, opportunity being the opportunity to help people. And then your agents have been able to go and spot opportunities to improve how a customer uses their service, or logical add-ons and things that would help them better use that service. A great example there of being able to help build revenue. And then once you have those revenue numbers, you can show the fact that we're earning our keep here. We're actually building revenue with the company and not just being a cost center at all. At least I'm setting part of the cost anyway. But again, just be careful not to have too many lofty targets, because it can drive the wrong behavior if you do that.
It's interesting because you mentioned data as an example. Well, here's an example of how you could use data. We've had folks come on and they say, okay, well, we look at people that have had a recent ticket, that have called into the contact center, and then over the next 90 days, what does their purchase profile look like versus those that didn't have a ticket? And what everybody has found is that actually having an interaction with the contact center when they're handled correctly, the way that they're trained to increase loyalty, increases repurchase or cross sell or upsell. So that's just an example. Look at your own data. There's so many stories within your own data of how you can advocate for yourself and go to that target audience that is very, very bottom line minded. If we're not making more money by reducing and cutting, then we're making more money how?
And that's a key as well. It's being able to justify it. I'll give you another example with this, which is that I went through as a customer and contacting a home improvement company. And it was interesting because I got a form letter back, and the form letter actually caused me to actually call the company to go and get it clarified. And when I talked to the customer service person, they actually said, first of all, that the letter itself was out of date and incorrect, that I didn't need to call at all. It wasn't an issue. And the way the person said it was such resignation. The way they said, "Oh, yeah, it's been out there for a year. Don't worry, it's out of date. You don't have to do that at all. It's okay." The way they said it, they knew internally it was a problem. But because of broken chain between most of the customer in marketing, designing these automatic response letters, so they've never been fixed. So that actually drove extra call volume. I was one of them excited to call it this company. It drove customer frustration, extra call volume or contact volume. It also built disillusionment though in the agent. I could hear it in their voice. So again, getting back to how much valuable data there is from your front line. You can actually streamline operations, not just in the contact center, but in marketing, shipping, billing, fulfillment. If you have a retail chain, those things can actually be improved, which builds efficiency and saves money. The very fact you've got an out-of-date letter that all the front line knows about driving contact volume, which is expensive, is a huge cost savings opportunity there. Another key in terms of being able to help save money or build more revenue.
I love it. We've covered a lot of territory. And so what I want to ask is, what haven't we covered? What's important that you want to make sure that we know that I haven't asked in a question or we haven't gotten to that yet?
I think one of the things that is there is we talk a lot about employee engagement or agent engagement. Turnover in a contact center is really expensive. The cost of having to go and recruit a brand new person on board, train them, get them up to speed, it costs a lot of money. And when somebody's new, no matter how well trained they are, as you all know, the first 6 months is all about just building competency. Even a year sometimes get to mastery. But if we're turning over 30, 50, 100% per year, this is where you're always in a state where most of your people are not very efficient, let alone cost money. So part of this is with engagement. And I think something that gets missed in this is the idea that people are engaged if they feel they can do something well. If they haven't been trained properly and they're constantly getting bombarded by things they can't handle or feeling bad or incompetent because they can't do it, they're going to quit and try to find a job that seems better for them. So I think one of the things that gets missed in all the talk about employee engagement and employee attitude is the idea about training people properly and equipping them with the right skills so they can help people out. And they actually have tools, things they can say and do to make the call go easier and help calm people down as well. And again, I'm coming from a training background, so I'm kind of biased towards that. Helping people with those tools out does help them feel better because then they can do their job well, feel good about it, help people and not get as frustrated. And that does build a lot more loyalty to the tool itself. And that's there, along with the proper technology tools as well, of course.
Yeah, they have more satisfaction in their own jobs. They're going to be happier. They're going to stay longer. You're going to attract people because you're going to create a culture internally that attracts the right kind of people. It snowballs out in its effect.
You're right about all of that. And so a lot of that is that sort of virtuous circle of having agents that are well motivated, well trained, and have the right tools that can help customers and be able to help, again, build that loyalty, build that branding. So it really does help with that an awful lot. The reverse of this is when you have people that feel very frustrated because they're not getting the training or don't have the tools. And I know a few sort of frontline aides, but their knowledge base, for instance, or their computer speed or having tool monitors, you'll get a lot of feedback there, but not feel like they're getting the right tools. So I just want to build that in as just looking at people and help support your frontline people. It's a tough job. I've done it. So you do want to support your frontline people.
So again, we've talked about a lot. If there was one thing that you wanted the audience to remember from this podcast, because we've talked about a lot of things and our poor human brains can't retain too much, what do you want us to retain? The one most important thing from our conversation here today?
I'd actually go back to what we first talked about, which is customer service is really a balance between those efficiency metrics, average handle time, things like that, which do have a purpose, but a balance with the efficiency or the effectiveness metrics. So looking at CSAT, less faction score, loyalty, etc., and the balance between the tech and the people. between the technology and being able to go and help people and what those interactions or conversations are like. And just remember the fact that all the tools in the world, AI, knowledge base, they're all there to enable your customers and help your customers out as the people are as well. So it's a balance between the two. And I think the balance got a little out of whack this year in the tech side. And it seems like it's going to circle back a little bit next year in 2025, more towards that balance between people and tech.
I love it. If people had follow-on questions, would it be appropriate that we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you?
It would be exactly. So reach out to LinkedIn, connect with me, follow me. I do post a lot of things, both my own articles and tips, as well as ones from other industry experts as well. So it gives you a really great informational ecosystem there to be able to learn more about how to run your contact center.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on and just helping us think differently. I got to tell you, the Morse code effect really sunk in. And it made me think, wow, you're right. We can't just assume that every medium, every agent's going to be completely comfortable, even as much as a phone. So that was one of my major takeaways is that rebalancing that Morse code effect and really thinking about that as we train and manage the operation. So thank you. Thank you for expanding all of our thinking about what we need to do to be successful.
Well, thank you for having me on the show as well. I appreciate that and appreciate a conversation.